Step into a lush green garden where a farmer is sweating over his labor, cultivating beds of sweet, healthy vegetables. One morning, a stranger passes by, places a silver bar on the table, and asks to buy all the weeds and pests at an astronomical price. Stunned, the farmer busies himself pulling every weed to sell, only to quickly realize that the naturally occurring weeds are not enough to satisfy his thirst for gold and silver. Consequently, the vibrant green vegetable beds are uprooted, and the fertile soil is tilled solely to nurse toxic weeds and breed pests. When the garden is overrun with disease and desolation, the stranger quietly departs, leaving the owner standing frozen in a kingdom of vermin, clutching silver bars that he cannot chew for food. This is the most cruel art of the manipulation game, using greed to borrow the victim's own hand to terminate their own living environment. To ruin an ecosystem or a solid foundation, a crude person would use armed force, fire, or poison. However, such superficial methods are always costly and immediately met with fierce resistance from the natives. Resistance creates the power of unity, and the attacker risks suffering retaliatory damage. A master puppet master never chooses such a clumsy path. The one who holds the handle understands that the most terrifying weapon of mass destruction does not lie in armories, but within human instinct itself. By establishing an artificial matrix of interests, the bait thrower can turn the very people living within that ecosystem into the most effective army of destruction. The process of manipulation always begins with a lure disguised as an opportunity. The dealer quietly penetrates the market and offers an absurdly high purchase price for things that are inherently worthless or even seeds of environmental destruction. It could be a voracious species that multiplies exponentially, a parasite that sucks the lifeblood out of crops, or deep-seated roots that hold water and prevent erosion for an entire forest. To the bait thrower, these things have no intrinsic utility. Their only value lies in the destructive power they bring when exploited or overbred. The bait thrower is not paying to buy goods. They are buying the collapse of a land. The masses always react according to a pre-programmed script. Initially, there is curiosity mixed with skepticism. The first scavengers hand over those seeds of peril and receive fair stacks of cash in return. Trust is established. Word of mouth begins to spread like an invisible virus. The crowd mocks the buyers as fools with more money than sense for buying trash, never realizing that they themselves are the puppets dancing on the stage of doom. Greed awakens, dispelling all hesitation and reason. Every person and every household rushes to the fields, ponds, and jungles to scavenge everything that can be converted into money. However, natural scavenging quickly reaches its limit. When the natural supply is exhausted to maintain the windfall of cash, the crowd is forced to step into the second stage of the trap, shifting from exploitation to cultivation and breeding. This is the fatal tipping point, where the victims themselves dismantle the final defensive layer of their homeland. Rice fields heavy with grain are plowed over to create ponds for voracious invasive species. Protective forest strips are ruthlessly felled just to dig up mindless roots. All resources, from land and water to labor, are poured into nurturing the biological seeds of disaster. The invasive invaders do not need to struggle for survival according to the laws of nature, for they are being pampered, protected, and multiplied at a terrifying speed by the masters of the land themselves. The house now begins to inflate the bubble to its limit, using the tactic of driving prices to even more insane heights. A virtual market is formed within the community itself. People no longer sell just to the stranger. They compete to buy back from their own neighbors at high prices, waiting to resell at even higher ones. A spontaneous network of collectors is born, turning an entire community into a massive speculation machine. The production of core values comes to a complete standstill. No one sows seeds, no one tends to fruit trees, because no traditional crop can bring the insane profits of trading those seeds of destruction. An artificial prosperity blankets every road. New houses rise, and luxury items are purchased. The crowd is intoxicated in a delirium of money, completely blind to the rot spreading beneath their feet. The fertile soil is gradually becoming barren and poisoned. The natural food chain is completely broken due to the absolute dominance of the invasive species. Native creatures are squeezed out, their food sources seized, and they gradually move toward the brink of extinction. The ecological environment is dying, but its screams are muffled by the rustling sound of counting money. The masses have injected a dose of anesthesia called greed into their own veins, happily severing parts of their own living body to sell to a stranger. And then, when everything has reached the pinnacle of absurdity, when the ecosystem has been drained to the point where it cannot recover, and when the population of invasive species has reached a massive volume beyond control, the house makes the final move. The perfect disappearance. The cash flow is cut abruptly without warning. The collectors stop trading. The stranger evaporates as if they never existed, leaving behind a shattered void. The speculative bubble bursts, taking all the illusory prosperity down the drain. Panic sets in as middleman traders realize they are holding tons of destructive organisms with no exchange value. Attempting to sell off in desperation, they are finally forced to dump everything back into the natural environment. Unlike financial bubbles, where assets evaporate into invisible numbers on a computer screen, the remnants of this ecological bubble are hungry living entities. Millions of voracious creatures swarm into the canals, devouring what little fragile vegetation remains. The fields become desolate, swamped in the destruction of the biological remnants. The land turns arid, the water becomes polluted, and the ecosystem collapses completely in the most naked and painful way. The price to be paid does not stop at the bankruptcy of a generation. The ecological consequences linger, creating a dead land that cannot be farmed for decades to come. The disease has eaten into the very marrow of nature. The local economy withers. The people lose their core means of production, and they find themselves empty-handed on the very land their ancestors toiled to preserve. The puppet master has succeeded brilliantly in destroying an opponent's productive foundation without wasting a single bullet or deploying a single soldier. The only cost they incurred was an initial amount of cash as bait, a pittance compared to the cost of rectifying the disaster the victim's land must bear. Dissecting this ruthless mechanism further, we clearly see the nature of an asymmetric art of war. It thoroughly exploits the fatal flaw in human psychology, the short-term profit mindset. When faced with a massive profit right before their eyes, the human brain automatically shuts down its long-term risk assessment functions. The structure of the trap is so perfect that it makes the victims delude themselves with incredibly logical arguments. People tell themselves that if they don't do it, someone else will, that they will just take advantage to earn a bit of capital and then stop, or that this land is vast and a little destruction won't hurt. It is the self-justification of thousands, tens of thousands of individuals combined that creates a giant knife tearing through the chest of Mother Nature. The terror of this trick lies in the fact that it creates an irreversible cycle of self-destruction from within. Once the masses become accustomed to making easy money from destruction, they lose the capacity for honest labor. Hands that once nurtured every rice stalk are now only used to scavenging and devastating. Even when the disaster is clear, many still harbor dreams of a day the buyer will return, continuing to keep the invasive seeds in desperate anticipation. The ecosystem is not only physically ruined, but the value system of labor and the survival ethics of a community are also completely demolished. This law of manipulation extends far beyond the boundaries of fields or forests. It is a universal principle applicable to every social structure. When an invisible power wants to hollow out any system, they do not need to attack a fortified facade. They only need to create an artificial demand and pay an extremely high price for the most toxic behaviors within that system. When things that are shallow, worthless, or corrosive to foundations are valued higher than dedication and true value, the masses will automatically discard their principles to chase illusory fame and fortune. The system will cannibalize its own internal organs to produce the trash the manipulator demands. Until the entire framework collapses, the one holding the handle only needs to gently withdraw their resources and watch the scene of ultimate devastation from afar. The play always ends with a chilling silence from the dead land, where the prey lie gasping for air amidst the ruins created by their own hands. Every argument, every justification becomes meaningless before the cruel law of nature, as no species can survive if they ruthlessly destroy the very land that nurtures them. The bait throwers do not create destruction, They simply awaken the monster of greed sleeping within each person and provide it with a reason to bite. When money drenched in the scent of calculation is paid out fairly to buy the seeds of desolation, how many will be sober enough to realize they are personally poisoning the rice bowl of their own children and grandchildren tomorrow?